talk about, close, we're going to talk about the Civil War in the United States and the first naval battle of the Civil War. Now, back in the fall of 1861, the Confederates discovered an abandoned Union Navy yard in Norfolk, Virginia. In the fall of 1861, the Confederates discovered an abandoned Union Navy yard in Norfolk, Virginia. Carla, what's a Union Navy yard? What would that be? Union Navy yard.
So like where the Union keeps the
where you park your ships.
Yeah,
Yep.
harbor.
But this happened to be an abandoned one. Now, in that abandoned Union Navy yard in Norfolk, Virginia, the Confederates claimed one of those abandoned ships called the Merrimack. So the Confederates find this abandoned Union Navy yard, and in the Navy yard are abandoned ships, and they pick one out and claim it, and it's called the Merrimack. And it had been burned down to the waterline. So what did you really have?
In the hull.
Well, not even a half ship. I mean, maybe all you had was outside the water. So the hull, in other words, the body of the ship, was gone. You just had basically a barge that was floating on top of the water. Okay? Well, what they did is the Confederates took this because that part of the ship was in good shape. They rebuilt it, reconstructed the hull, and they added a 4-inch metal plating to it, iron plating. So the hull now is 4 inches thick, made out of metal. So they take this abandoned abandoned Union ship called the Merrimack. It had been burned down to the waterline. They reconstruct the hull and they add a 4-inch iron plating to it. Pretty thick. Now, by the time they got done reconstructing this vessel, it was equipped with 10 guns and a cast iron battering ram. So they completely rebuilt this ship, rebuilt the hull, 4-inch metal iron plating, equipped it with 10 guns and a cast iron battering ram. When they got done with the Merrimack, this Confederate ship was more powerful than any ship in the Union Navy at that point. They really did quite a job of reconstructing this naval battleship, known as the Merrimack. Well, two people were pretty concerned about it on the Union side. The first person was Gustavus Fox. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for President Lincoln. Gustavus Fox was concerned about this new Confederate weapon, and he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Lincoln. And he was quoted as saying, and you don't have to write this down, but just listen, he said, quote, "Who is to prevent her from dropping anchor in the Potomac and throwing her 100-pound shells into the White House?" He was scared to death. They could basically sail that ship into the Potomac River, which is kind of close to the Lincoln Memorial now, and you'll be there in a year, and easily lobbed cannon fire into the White House from there. And that was his concern. Very, very concerned about this new weapon. Well, what do they have to do? What's the Union going to have to do to counteract this? They're going to have to build their own ship, bigger and better than the Merrimack. And that's what they plan to do. So their goal is to build a bigger battleship, better battleship than the Confederates have. And the man that's going to be responsible to make sure this gets done is Lincoln's Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles. Gideon Welles. So the man that's going to be responsible to put the ball in motion to get this new battleship built that was equal or better than the Confederate Merrimack was Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. Now, you think Gideon Welles is a shipbuilder, Caitlin? No. So what's he going to do to get this ship built? He's going to have somebody do it. And he enlists the support and help of a Swedish-born inventor by the name of John Ericsson. So Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, unable to build a ship himself or design one, turns to the talents of a Swedish-born inventor by the name of John Ericsson, and he contracts Ericsson to build this ship that will surpass the Merrimack. Okay? So Swedish-born inventor John Ericsson is contracted by Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles to build this battleship to surpass the Merrimack. And this new Union ship is going to be called the Monitor. The Monitor. And it's going to be a little bit different than the Merrimack. And you tell me if it's going to be comparable or better. Okay? This ship is only going to have 2 guns and a cast iron battering ram. It's only going to have 2 guns. Is it better or worse? Why? What?
Depends on the gun.
What?
But they can probably only shoot.
Well, if I'm on the Merrimack and my gun is facing this way, I could hit these people, but I couldn't hit these people very good.
These 2 guns were at the front and end swiveling, weren't
They were revolving guns. Very good. So they could turn to Naya or turn to Emily. So it was probably as effective. Well, you make up your mind when I tell you what happened. They only had 2 guns, but they were revolving guns. They could move all the way around, whereas you had to be pointed at the enemy in the Merrimack to do damage. Well, on March 9th of 1862, the Monitor and the Merrimack did battle just outside Hampton Roads, Virginia. On March 9th, 1862, the Monitor for the Union and the Merrimack from the Confederacy had a naval battle between themselves to see who was better. And that happened just outside Hampton Roads, Virginia, again on March 9th, 1862. What do you think happened, Hannah? See, I just saw Hannah. I met her boyfriend, he's awesome. So Peyton, what do you think happened when those 2 met? Considering the story. They shot at each other at very close range, very good. So close they actually bumped into each other 5 different times while they were fighting. Very good. How did it turn out, Joe? Why? Because you like the Patriots doesn't mean they're going to win the Super Bowl, although they are. That reminds me of do something else. How did it turn out? Joe had a good guess, but he wasn't quite right.
Merrimack more because it shoot more at the same time. They're all going to
Wasn't it a stalemate?
What?
Wasn't it like a
It was a
stalemate?
stalemate, yeah. They were both very well equipped and so equal that they fought for several hours. 4.5 to be exact. And finally the Merrimack, the Confederate Merrimack drew off, which means they kind of backed off, and they considered the entire thing a draw or stalemate. Both ships, very good ships, none superior more than the other. Okay? All right, there's that story for you. That's going to take us to our new subtopic, which is kind of important, the Civil War in the Western Theater. In the Western Theater. So, Lily, where's the fighting being done if it's in the Western Theater? West of? What?
Mississippi. The South.
West of what, Julie?
Mountains.
Which mountains, Julie? Appalachian Mountains. So this is going to be a fight of the Civil War in the geographic location of west of the Appalachians, thus the name Western Theater. Now remember, after the first Battle of Bull Run, Lincoln stayed up all night to replan strategy. And the strategy was to gain control of the Mississippi River, thus cutting the Confederacy in half. Now there were 3 specific states that he wanted to separate from the rest of the South. What 3 states would they be, David? Thinking that we're going to gain control of the Mississippi River to do so. What 3 states did he really want to separate from the South? Give me a guess. A hint, they would have to be west of the Mississippi River because gaining control of it wouldn't do you any good if they were east. How about it, Gabe?
Louisiana.
Louisiana would be one. Now, David, take that into consideration. See if you can come up with another one. Geography man. Okay, Louisiana. Anybody else got one? Yes, Gabe?
Texas.
Texas. And one more, Gabe. Go for the trifecta. The hat trick, all three. Had a president from there not too long ago, was pretty good. Served 2 terms. Had us out of debt tremendously when he left office. Wasn't very good morally, though. Where's President Clinton from? No, the A state, Arkansas. So, the 3 states, the 3 Confederate states they wanted to separate from the rest of the South by gaining control of the Mississippi River were Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. Now, in order to do that, they were going to have to take 3 key states just east of the Mississippi so they could plow their way to gain control of the Mississippi. What 3 states did they have to gain control of in the South to gain control of the Mississippi River to make sure they got these 3 states? Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky. So the 3 states that had to be captured by the Union in order to gain control of the Mississippi River, thus cutting Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas away from the rest of the South, were Mississippi, Tennessee, and Kentucky. I'll just give you a quick prelude. Order of difficulty to gain control of: Mississippi would be the most difficult, Tennessee would be the second most difficult, and Kentucky would be cakewalk. But those are the 3 states that had to be taken. So let's start with Kentucky. That's going to be the first target that the Union's going to try to hit to gain control of the Mississippi River. Now, Kentucky's kind of an interesting state because where are they located geographically, kind of? In between. So you have, to be honest with you, the northern part of Kentucky was more favoring the north, and maybe the southern part of Kentucky was favoring the south. But somebody stepped in and made it easy for the Union to take Kentucky. What famous politician we talked about who would have tremendous influence on the people in the state of Kentucky helped the Union take that state back? No. I've already talked about it. The great compromiser, Henry Clay. Remember, Henry Clay was from Kentucky, and he had great political influence in that state. So basically, the Union came in and took Kentucky. Had no problem gaining control of Kentucky from the north. So Kentucky's the first target. This state had strong ties in both the north and the south, but their famous politician, Henry Clay, was a Kentucky northerner. He had tremendous influence within the state. So Kentucky was controlled by the Union without much difficulty at all. Tennessee, however, kiddos, would be a little different story. Tennessee would be a little different story. Now, the Confederate general that was responsible to form a defensive line north of Nashville, Tennessee, to stop this Union advance was Albert Johnston. Very good, Albert Johnston. So as the Union Army is marching from the east towards Kentucky, which they've already taken, and now Tennessee, Confederate General Albert Johnston is responsible to form a defensive line position to protect Tennessee near Nashville. He made a defensive line. When you make a defensive line, you are defending your home. So he's not on the offensive, right? Who's on the offensive? The Union. On the defensive will be Confederate General Albert Johnston and Confederate troops trying to keep the Union troops from sweeping through Tennessee and gaining control. Now, who's going to lead Union troops on this assault of Kentucky and Tennessee? Ulysses S Grant, who is nothing more than a working man at the time. Winfield Scott is the overall commander of Union forces in the Civil War, and Ulysses S Grant, general, is mainly a working man, a field commander. Okay? He's a field commander. So what Union General Ulysses S Grant's going to do is he's going to take the offensive against those defensive Confederate forces, and they're going to clash north of Nashville. Now, there were 2 very important forts that were held by Tennessee that the Union needed to gain control of to make their goal happen of taking the state into their possession. One was Fort Henry on the Tennessee River, and the other one was Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. C-U-M-B-E-R-L-A-N-D. So your two important forts that the Union needed to secure, that Tennessee had control of at the time, were Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. C-U-M-B-E-R-L-A-N-D. Those two forts, if they're taken by the Union, they will sweep through and gain control of the state of Tennessee, conquering the second state out of the three they needed to secure the Mississippi River and cut Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas away from the Confederacy. Now, Fort Henry is going to be hard to defend, and General Johnston knows that. And on top of that, by February 1st of 1862, the Tennessee River was so high it was overflowing, and it was even flooding parts of Fort Henry, which is going to make it difficult to defend. So General Johnston's very concerned. He knows Fort Henry is going to be hard to defend, and by February 1st of 1862, the Tennessee River was over its banks and threatened to flood Fort Henry. So, on February 4th and 5th of 1862, February 4th and 5th of 1862, General Grant's going to land his Union troops and place them in two different locations near Fort Henry. On February 4th and 5th, 1862, General Grant's going to arrive with Union soldiers, and he's going to split them up and put them in two different locations near Fort Henry. One of his divisions is going to be on the east bank of the Tennessee River, and the other division is going to get on the high ground on the northern side of Fort Henry. So Grant's going to march there, 4th and 5th. He's going to divide his battalion into two parts. Half of his battalion is going to go to the banks, the east bank of the Tennessee River, and the other half is going to go to the high ground on the northern or Kentucky side of Fort Henry. Now, because of the climate and what's going on there, on February 6th, 1862, Grant's going to use a combined land and gunboat attack against Fort Henry. What's a gunboat? It's a tiny boat that's loaded with guns. But what's going to be the key to a gunboat on a river?
Anchors.
It's gotta be close to the shoot.
You can't sometimes get in these rivers because they're too low. Not now. We got flooding going on, and the rivers are as high as they ever going to be, and it makes it easy for Grant to get his gunboats in the Tennessee River and use them as a tactical weapon against the Confederates. So on February 6th, using that combined land and gunboat attack, the Union captured Fort Henry in 1 hour and 15 minutes. That was it. Using both ground forces and their gunboats, firing from there, it only took Grant about 1 hour and 15 minutes, 75 minutes, to capture Fort Henry. Casualties were pretty minimal. You're not going to hear you're going to hear a lot more casualties as we go. The Union lost 40 men in this particular fight for Fort Henry, and the Confederates lost 79, almost 80. So the Confederates lost twice as many, really, 40 to 79, which we go back to our population issue, was a huge loss in a way. Not with these kind of numbers. I mean, losing that many men is nothing to snivel about or not worry about. But when we start getting into thousands and hundreds of thousands of men, it's a big difference when you have a 2-to-1 ratio, especially against the Confederacy, because they're outpopulated 20 million to 5.5, remember? Okay, so what does Grant do then, Laramie? As soon as he wins at Fort Henry, what's he going to do now? Yes, he is. He's going to march his men 12 miles to Fort Donelson. on the Cumberland River, and he's going to make an attempt to take that fort as well. So after their victory at Fort Henry, minimal casualties, Grant's going to march his troops 12 miles straight toward Fort Donelson. Now, is General Johnston at Fort Donelson? No, he was defending the lines before they ever got to Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Now, he really was responsible for Fort Henry, which he dropped. But Fort Donelson was commanded by two Southern generals, Simon B. Buckner and John B. Floyd, were the two Confederate generals in charge of Fort Donelson and holding the ground there. Albert Johnston is still licking his wounds a little bit from Fort Henry and trying to get back with some reinforcements to help him out. But it will be Buckner and Floyd's job to dig in and keep General Grant and the Union from taking Fort Donelson. Well, it was on February 12th of 1862 that Grant and the forces arrived at Fort Donelson. February 12th. Now, what time of the year is this? Winter, kind of cold. Okay, it's going to get really cold. Record colds here. So on February 12th, 1862, General Grant and the Union forces arrive at Fort Donelson. Fighting commences for the next 2 days with little gain on either side. So these guys, the Union Confederate forces, clashed at Fort Donelson for 2 days, and by the end of the second day, there was littler gain on either side. The trouble was, the night of the 13th, it got bitter, bitter cold. And it was so cold that soldiers on both sides basically marched all night.